As the son will go through his life, the father knows that he's going to encounter several different temptations. So far, he's given him advice about avoiding the gang, or about making sure that he keeps his eyes fixed on the straight path, about not listening to the people who are around who want to get him to join in their wicked activities or the evil things that they do. But in this section, what the father is turning his attention to is really the temptation of seduction. As his son enters out into the world, he knows he's going to face different temptations. Really, this is represented in this section right here by a forbidden woman, a woman that is off limits to him. And so the father turns to his son and he provides this instruction or this lesson in a little bit of a different way. Really, what he's suggesting to the son is not just, hey, hands off the forbidden woman, but what he tries to do is provide the son a bit of a picture of what the woman is like and then what his own woman could be like. In other words, I think the father's encouraging his son to choose his delights. In fact, I think if we're going to attach a name to this section, we could call it Choosing Your Delights. Here, we meet two characters, essentially, as the father gives the instructions to the son. The first character that we meet is someone else's wife. This is the woman that we have encountered a few times before in the book of Proverbs, and we will encounter a figure like her again. But really the focus in this section seems to be on the fact that she doesn't belong to you. She's not in a covenant commitment with you. In fact, she is in a covenant commitment with someone else. She is someone else's wife. But the other character we meet is your own wife. And here, in the second half of what the father has to say to the son, he provides instruction for him on enjoying his own wife and his own marriage and choosing that delight instead. And so, as we enter into Proverbs chapter 5 here, it may feel a little bit different than some of the places we've been before. McCain calls this a robust man-to-man warning. And in some sense, we may find that some texts here are a bit more explicit than we've encountered previously. But the reality is, these are the temptations that the son is going to face. And the father is concerned here with success, with his son actually facing life in the real world and coming out on the other side, still walking the way of wisdom. And so he jumps into his teaching here in verse 1. He says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen closely to my understanding." The father calls it my wisdom and my teaching here. He says, so that you may maintain discretion and your lips safeguard knowledge. In the ancient Near East, people would marry at an early age. And what the father is suggesting here is that as he goes out into his life, he needs to make sure that he's protected. The words that he's going to give his son here will help protect him even as he enters into a marriage relationship. Perhaps this feels weird to us that people would marry so early, but we see examples in Scripture. King Josiah married at age 14, Jehoiachin at age 16. In Egypt, it was normal practice for girls to marry at the age of 12, and for boys to marry at the age of 15. And so I think really the instruction here is to a young man. Maybe we would say someone who's in junior high or middle school. They're aging into high school, into their middle teenage years, and that's the time that they need to hear this message. And so, verse 3, though the lips of the forbidden woman drip honey, and her words are smoother than oil. Notice what's happening here. The father is beginning to describe the woman by describing what she does. She has these lips that are like a honeycomb that are just dripping honey. Her words as they come out are smoother than oil. We can hear the enticement of the woman as she's presented to us here. Now, This woman is called a forbidden woman or a strange woman. She's a claimed woman. She is not one who belongs to this young man. She has not entered into a commitment with him, but rather she is off limits. So even though she might appear attractive to the young man, he needs to recognize that she is not something that he can take hold of. Even her words or her lips, they're deceptive, because even though he could take that if he wanted to, it would result in terrible things for him. And so I think what the father is trying to do is he's trying to help the son realize what temptations he will face. It's like Proverbs chapter 1, verse 17, once again, where the father's sort of clearing away the leaves so that we can see the net that's lying right there. And so, in vain is a net spread in the sight of a bird, but son, here's what I'm doing. I'm trying to help you see the picture. This is what temptations await you. It's a trap. Her words and her lips may be enticing, but it is a trap. He tells him as much in verse 4. In the end, she's as bitter as wormwood and as sharp as a double-edged sword. The purported paradise that the woman seems to offer is actually perdition. Go to her, and you will experience the consequences. Now, let me just say a word here about the nature of the temptation. I understand that in our cultural moment, it feels a little bit strange to talk about a woman seducing a man, right? Shouldn't we think about the way that men might abuse women? But I think the reality here is that the father's trying to prepare the children for the various things that they may encounter. And while the son is mentioned frequently in these texts, I think the father is concerned with instructing both his sons and his daughters, right? He wants his children to grow up in a way that is wise. And he knows that one of the primary temptations that will face young people as they head out into the world is that of seduction. This takes different forms, and it might play out in different ways in different cultures, but the temptation of seduction is the same. So even if we hear these words and we maybe feel a little bit offended or a little bit bothered that he's not telling the son that he needs to make sure that he's not taking advantage of women, I think we can hear these words as a warning of the father to guard against seduction. No matter what you do, son, you need to be aware that there are those out there that would like to entice you and bring you down into this path to death. In fact, verse 5 says this, her feet go down to death. We're talking about the woman again. Her steps head straight for Sheol. In Ezekiel 16:25, God, in this sort of scathing rebuke for the people of Israel, suggests that they offered their feet to whoever would pass by. Feet can be a euphemism in biblical Hebrew for sexual organs. And I think that's sort of the idea here, that her feet, if you would enter into a sexual relationship with her, they would head down. It's a way that heads down to death. Her steps head straight for Sheol. I think there's a metaphor that the father's playing with here, and that is sex as a journey. You have to choose how you're going to go along this path. You can take the path with this forbidden woman, but it will in fact lead you to death. Verse 6, she doesn't consider the path of life. She doesn't know that her ways are unstable. She wants to avoid the life path, it seems. She's unaware of where she's going. Maybe she doesn't even know where she's headed, but she knows it's not straight, and she doesn't care. She's on her way regardless. And so, verse 7, now, sons, listen to me. Don't turn away from the words from my mouth. Keep your way far from her. Don't go near the door of her house. The word here is actually not door in biblical Hebrew. It's the opening of her house, and I think is another sexual reference. If you go near her opening, if you choose to approach her, then you will, verse 9, give up your vitality to others and your years to someone cruel. Strangers will drain your resources, and your hard-earned pay will end up in a foreigner's house. Financial consequences will abound, but also social consequences, right? You're going to have the social consequence of the community that knows what you have done. Not to mention the emotional and the spiritual consequences that come with sleeping with a forbidden woman. And so the father's trying to encourage the son here. Let me show you what this is actually like. If you would choose to go down this path, here's where it heads. Remember, the Father's concerned about the life of the Son. He wants him to experience success. He wants him to experience hope and joy for all of his days. And so he says, I know that you're going to encounter a situation. You are going to encounter seduction in life, whatever form this takes. And in those moments, remember where that road leads. You keep your way far away from her. Verse 11, at the end of your life, you will lament when your physical body has been consumed. And you will say, oh, how I hated discipline and how my heart despised correction. I didn't obey my teachers or listen closely to my instructors. I am on the verge of complete ruin before the entire community. In other words, at the end of your life, you will find yourself regretting the decisions that you had made. I think this actually gives us a little bit of a picture of what the Father's trying to do for the Son. As he gives instructions to his son, it's almost as if he's showing him a picture of all of his life. If we can imagine the son's life looking something like this, right? He's born and then he lives his life, and at some point he dies. What we're talking about, this experience with this woman, happens right here, kind of in the middle of his life, right? As the son is living his life and he encounters the forbidden woman, he has a choice to make. What the Father is doing then is he's not trying to just tell the son, hey, I want you to focus here in on this moment and making the right choice. What the Father frequently does is he focuses on the end. When you get to the end of your life, when you get to the end of the situation, once you get past the initial temptation, what is this really like? And frequently, what the Father gives the Son is a picture of how it ends, not just how it begins. Because he does it in this way, I think this is preparing the Son well for what he might face. It's a way of helping prepare him for the temptations of life by focusing on the outcome. All of the things that the Father lists here in verses 11 through 14, these are the true costs of the trade that the Son will make. The hidden fees are just going to kill him. We understand that all of this is very practical instruction, right? Very rarely in the throes of being seduced does one feel, do I really want to make this decision? How will I feel at the end of my days when I'm sitting and I'm growing old? Am I going to feel like I made a wise decision here, or was this a foolish decision? No, in the throes of seduction, it's very easy to get caught up in the moment. It's very easy to allow your feelings to carry you away to someplace else, to be so caught up by what's happening in front of you that you miss sight of the whole picture. And the Father says, son, you have to prepare in advance to make sure you keep the whole picture in mind. Don't lose sight of where this path heads. But that's not where the Father's instructions end. He goes on in verses 15 through and following to now shift to another character. Here, he's going to focus on your own wife. Again, I think this suggests that the son perhaps is already married or on the verge, on the brink of getting married. And the alternative for this moment then is to drink. He says, verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, water flowing from your own well. This, I think, is another sexual metaphor. Wells are a frequent, they're used, this idea is used, or concept is used frequently throughout the book of Proverbs, throughout the book of Song of Songs, and there it refers to someone's sexual vitality. So there's a difference, a stark difference between a pit, which he'll find himself in if he goes to the forbidden woman, and a well, this spring that ever is being replenished. Should your springs flow in the street, he says, streams in the public squares, they should be for you alone and not for you to share with strangers. The Father's very concerned that the Son keeps his sexuality limited to that between he and his wife. It's not something that should overflow into the streets. It's not something that he should carry with him to the forbidden woman, to perhaps his neighbor's wife down the street. No. You allow your sexuality to be in your marriage for you and your wife alone. And then he says in verse 18, let your fountain be blessed and take pleasure in the wife of your youth. I think what we're reading in the verses here are a parental blessing on his son's sex. He wants him to enjoy his wife, to enjoy the process here. He says, a loving deer, a graceful doe, let her breasts always satisfy you. Be lost in her love forever. He hopes, the father hopes, that his experience with his wife will produce endless offspring and sexual delight. This is what he wants for his son. So why, then, would you lose yourself with a forbidden woman or embrace a wayward woman? Instead, get lost in the love of your wife. In her love, that phrase there, be lost in her love forever, Fox thinks that this is always a sexual type of love. So may you be lost in that continually. May you find it this endless source of satisfaction. And so, really, essentially, the son is being challenged. Where would you like to get lost, right? Verse 19, get lost in her love, but don't get lost. Don't lose yourself, verse 20, with the forbidden woman. I think the reality is, as the father is sort of concluding these instructions to his son, he's reminding him that just because he chooses to stay with his own wife doesn't mean that life has to be dull. Just because he chooses to remain with his wife and not go with the forbidden woman, it doesn't mean that he can't enjoy the delights of sex. He's saying, no, life can be very delightful. Sex can be very enjoyable within the confines of how God has created, of what God has designed for it. And so his encouragement to his son here is to choose his delights wisely. Would you like the temporary satisfaction of the forbidden woman that ends in all sorts of regret and loss and pain and death? Or would you like the delights of your wife, which is like a continuous stream, an ever-flowing well, being replenished day after day? Will you be able to find delight in her love and in the context of that relationship? For a man's ways, he says in verse 21, are before the Lord's eyes, and he considers all his paths. A wicked man's iniquities will trap him. He will become tangled in the ropes of his own sin. He will die because there is no discipline, and be lost because of his great stupidity. And so I can just imagine the father looking at the son and saying, so are you stupid? No, you're not. So choose wisely. As we go throughout life, we also know that our world presents us with many temptations. And I think the Father's words to us, like they were to the Son, would be to step back from those temptations. Perhaps even before we find ourselves in the midst of them, step back and ask ourselves the question, where would we choose to get lost? Where would we choose to find our delight? Will it be in someone or something that is off limits, something that will only bring hurt and pain and death? Or will we choose to delight in the areas that God has blessed, the relationships that God has smiled on? Will we choose God's way? Because that way is a way of true delight.